As they lowered Caleb Parker into the ground, the cold turned sharp enough to sting my teeth, and Owen's small hand kept tightening inside mine. He looked up and whispered, "When does Dad come home?" And I bent closer because the only thing worse than grief was answering him there. I told him, "Dad is resting," while dirt tapped the coffin and every thud sounded like a door closing where I would never follow again. We drove back to the house with mourners behind us. And when the doors opened, the living room felt warmer than the cemetery, but crueler. Owen slipped from my side when he saw Caleb's photograph among the flowers, reached for it with both hands, and dropped it on the tile. The glass broke. The room went still. And before his apology finished leaving his mouth, Denise Parker stepped forward and struck my little boy hard. I pulled him against my chest as his cheek flared red, and Denise stared at us like grief had given her permission to be honest. She called him trash in front of Caleb's relatives, and when I asked how she could hit my child, Robert Parker told me to leave. Then Tessa Morgan folded her arms, looked me over like something temporary, and let me know this house was never built for women like me. I wiped Owen's face, reached into my coat, and dialed the only number Caleb had made me memorize, because panic would not protect my son. When the call connected, I kept my eyes on Denise and told the voice, "I need you here now. It's time," then ended it coldly. Nobody in that room understood why my tears stopped so fast, but I did, because the minute Denise touched Owen, the waiting was over completely. I kept Owen against my side and looked around the living room Caleb had paid for, feeling the same old truth settle over me harder than the funeral had. Even with flowers on every table and relatives filling every chair, that house had never once felt like a place where I could exhale fully. I had lived inside their family for years the way a guest lives near the door, welcomed when quiet, tolerated when useful, and blamed whenever something turned cold. I worked the front desk at a dental clinic, packed lunches before daylight, paid bills on time, and still Denise treated me like I had arrived carrying mud. Robert wore his disapproval better, smoother, cleaner, but it always landed the same, in comments about standards, appearances, and what Caleb could have had. Tessa never bothered hiding hers, and standing there beside the broken glass, she looked at me with the satisfaction of someone watching a prediction come true. Caleb used to stand between us and call it peace, which only worked because I wanted so badly to believe patience could become belonging. I told myself enough holidays, enough dinners, enough swallowed pride, and one day they would stop seeing me as the middle-class mistake their son married. But Denise had just slapped my son hard enough to leave a mark in front of witnesses, and the sting on his face killed that lie faster than grief. Denise kept her hand lifted a second too long, like striking my son had steadied something inside her. Then she looked at me and called him the mistake Caleb never corrected. I felt Owen shaking against me, and when I asked how she could say that over broken glass and funeral flowers, her face stayed flat. She told me grief had no room for pretending, and that everybody in the house had spent years cleaning up after the life Caleb built with me. Robert stepped in with that measured voice he used whenever he wanted cruelty to sound reasonable, and he told me I should pack before the evening got uglier. He said Caleb had carried me long enough, that a woman from my background would never understand what their family had protected for generations. Tessa folded her arms near the doorway, looked from my coat to my shoes, and smiled like she had waited years to watch my place disappear. She said the whole room knew I had only ever been temporary, the kind of wife men choose before they remember what they actually deserve. A few people shifted in their seats, but nobody came closer, and that silence felt worse than Denise's hand landing across Owen's face. Owen buried his mouth against my shoulder and whispered, "Mom." I didn't mean to, and hearing him apologize inside that room nearly split me open. Denise told us to get out before dinner was cleared. Robert told me not to test what little generosity they had left, and Tessa laughed. I wiped Owen's cheek, straightened my coat, and let the three of them finish, because something colder than shock had started settling where panic belonged. When I finally said, "Fine," the word landed so cleanly that even the people enjoying my humiliation stopped moving for a beat. Nobody rushed us after that because the room had turned mean in a quieter way, the kind that leans back and waits for a widow to break first publicly. Owen had cried himself into hiccuping breaths against my neck, and I stayed where I was, one hand on his back, because leaving on command would make it real. Denise kept glancing toward the foyer like she wanted the scene over, while Robert watched me with that patient contempt men use when they think time belongs to them. A few weeks before Caleb died, he had started stepping outside to take calls. Then coming home with legal envelopes, he slid into drawers without explanation after dinner every night. One night he stood in our kitchen, looked straight at me, and quietly asked, "If something happens, can you hold on to what belongs to our son now?" I thought grief had already started talking through him, because men who still plan to live do not ask questions like that with one hand shaking on the counter. So when Robert finally asked who I was waiting for, I told him, someone Caleb trusted more than the people in this room, and let silence finish it. Tessa rolled her eyes. Denise muttered that I was dragging out drama, and neither of them understood why I had stopped looking frightened by then for the first time. When the front door finally opened, I did not turn right away, because I already knew the sound of arrival was the only thing left separating them from truth. When I finally turned, Grant Holloway was already inside the room, dark coat still buttoned, a leather file under one arm, his assistant closing the door behind him softly, quietly. Denise straightened so fast her chair scraped the floor, and Robert stepped forward with the confidence of a man. Certain paperwork could never outrank blood in this house of theirs. Grant did not offer condolences or small talk. He opened the file and said, "I'm here under Caleb Parker's final estate instructions and trust documents executed last month before death." The room changed before anyone spoke, because the words final and trust landed harder than the slap still burning across Owen's cheek against my coat from minutes earlier there now. Robert told him there had to be some mistake, that immediate family handled these matters, and that grieving people should not be ambushed in their own home like this today. Grant barely looked up before explaining that Caleb had transferred the house, major liquid assets, and controlling business interests into a trust naming Owen Parker sole beneficiary weeks earlier already. My arms tightened around Owen as Denise asked when this had happened, and Grant answered by sliding one page free and placing the signature date toward her without hurry whatsoever. 1 month before Caleb died, everything important had been moved where your temper, your assumptions, and your last name could not reach it from this room tonight ever again at all. Tessa laughed once, too sharply, then tried the ugliest explanation left, saying Caleb must have signed whatever I put in front of him while he was weak and scared already. I looked at her, then at the same broken glass still glinting near the flowers, and told her, no, he signed when he finally saw clearly what lived here daily. Grant turned another page and made it worse for them, confirming that I had authority to remain in the house and manage everything for Owen until he came of age. Nobody in that room could miss what had happened then, because Denise had just ordered the lawful guardian of the owner out of his own house in front of witnesses. Grant pulled a second envelope from the file and placed it beside Caleb's trust papers, and that smaller packet changed the air more than the first one had today. My name was written across the front in Caleb's hand, the same block letters I had seen on lunch notes and hardware receipts for years before he died. I opened it with Owen still against me, and inside were printed transfers, account summaries, and one short note that made Denise stop breathing normally where she stood. Caleb had traced money moving out of his company in small, familiar amounts, the kind no customer would notice, but family always called temporary help at home quietly. Robert had been covering shortfalls. Tessa had been feeding her debts, and both of them had trusted Caleb's silence more than they ever trusted his love for them, too. The note was only one sentence, but it hit harder than the trust itself. If they push you out, open everything and let them hear it from me. Then I saw the name Vanessa Reed in the printed call logs, in parking receipts, and in messages Caleb had preserved instead of deleting them months before dying. She was not some stray mistake hidden in the dark. Caleb had documented meetings, transfers, and a string of contact with Denise and Tessa, too, behind my back. By then, even the people near the doorway understood this was bigger than betrayal, because the woman Caleb slept with had been planning around me with his family already. Tessa snapped that I was twisting grief into jealousy, but I kept my eyes on the pages and told her jealousy leaves no paper trail worth reading twice. What Caleb had done to me was ugly enough, but what he uncovered was uglier, because even his affair had been folded into their money hunger from him. I looked at Denise, then Robert, then the sister who had just laughed at my son, and understood Caleb had betrayed me last but not least before he died. Robert recovered first. Squaring his shoulders like paperwork, could still be bullied into obedience, and told Grant no document changed the fact that Caleb's parents belonged there more than I did. Grant kept one hand on the open file and explained that belonging was not the issue before him, because authority, access, and control had already been assigned elsewhere in writing. Denise tried grief instead of rage, pressing one hand to her chest and saying no decent widow would use a dead man's paperwork to strip his mother inside her own home. Tessa moved closer then, sharp and polished and desperate, insisting I had turned Caleb's last weeks into a private trap because I knew I could never keep him any other way. I looked at the transfer pages, the call logs, and the note Caleb left me, then told her, I did not write any of this. Your family did. That landed harder than yelling would have, because every page in Grant's file carried dates, signatures, timestamps, and amounts none of them had expected to see outside Caleb's desk. Robert pushed again, this time demanding more time, more respect, more room for family to settle matters privately without outsiders standing there turning sorrow into spectacle tonight. Grant answered by reading the next line that mattered, explaining certain business accounts had already been flagged, access had narrowed, and post-death activity would face immediate review. I saw it then in Robert's face, before anyone else caught it fully. The first clean flash of fear from a man who finally understood systems, remember. Denise told me I could not shut out Caleb's blood, and I held Owen closer and gave her the only truth left, worth saying there. I am not shutting out his blood. I am standing where Caleb put his son. The room went quiet in the ugly, practical way people do when they realize the script has changed and nobody knows where to stand anymore. I looked down at Owen's cheek, still pink from Denise's hand, and that mark settled everything faster than grief, paperwork, or blood ever could. Grant closed the file halfway and outlined the next steps with calm precision, making clear that occupancy, access, and control would now follow the documents Caleb signed. Denise started crying for real then, but even that came too late, because tears could not lift her hand back off my son's face. Robert looked around the room like authority might return if enough people witnessed his embarrassment, while Tessa reached for her phone with nowhere left to direct it. I tightened my arms around Owen and told them, no one touches my son again, and no one decides for him inside this house except me. Nobody argued with that right away, which told me more than anything shouted earlier, because even the cruelest people go silent when power stops pretending. Grant explained the legal timeline for vacating and restricted access, and every word stripped another layer off the certainty they had been wearing all afternoon. Denise whispered that this was still her son's home, and I looked straight at her and told her, you told my son to get out of his own house. That sentence stayed in the room after I finished it, heavier than the funeral dirt, heavier than the broken glass, heavier than every insult they had thrown at me. Robert had no answer left that could outrun signatures, dates, and the child breathing against my shoulder while they stood there empty-handed. I kissed Owen's hair, felt him finally loosen in my arms, and understood the people leaving that house would not be us tonight. Over the next few days, everything moved the way truth moves, when it finally has signatures behind it. Quietly, officially, and without asking anyone's pride for permission. Denise and Robert stopped speaking like owners because ownership had left them on paper before it ever left their mouths in that living room. Tessa lost the easy confidence she wore like jewelry once the old access points closed, and the family money she leaned on stopped bending around her. Vanessa Reed never made it through the front door the way she must have imagined, because whatever future she thought she was stepping into had already been sealed. Caleb's records gave her exactly one role in the story, and it was not widow, not partner, not replacement, only proof of how far greed had spread. I did not chase her, expose her publicly, or give her more of my life than the documents already had. Because facts can finish people cleanly. Robert had to face accounts that no longer opened for him. Denise had to leave rooms she treated like inheritance. And Tessa had to live without borrowed certainty. I never screamed, never dragged anyone through the mud, and never needed revenge to look uglier than what they had already done themselves. When people ask what happened after that night, the truest answer is still the simplest one: nobody escaped. And I never had to become them. A week later, the house sounded different. Not happier exactly, but honest. The way rooms sound after doors stop opening for people who only ever brought tension inside. Owen played on the living room rug without looking toward the hallway first. And that small change told me more about safety than any document ever could. I sat beside him and understood that keeping this house mattered less than keeping the line around him clear, visible, and impossible for anyone to cross again. Caleb had failed me in ways I would carry for a long time, and no legal paper could turn betrayal into something gentle just because he died. But the last thing he did right was put distance between our son and the people who thought blood excused cruelty. And I would not waste that. When Owen leaned against me and whispered, "We're staying," I kissed his hair and let that be the first peaceful truth either of us had trusted all week. I was not the woman who walked into that funeral still, hoping patience could earn a place where love never had. I was the woman who stayed, held the line, and learned that mercy without boundaries is only another way to disappear slowly. What I kept in the end was not a house, not Caleb's name, not even victory, but the right to decide who never gets near my child again. Thank you for staying with me through this story and spending part of your day here with me. If it stayed with you, like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from below. I always love seeing how far these stories travel.